Our service will continue now with the reading this morning, which comes to us from the Gospel of Matthew. And this is Jesus' continuation of the Sermon on the Mount. And this is chapter 6, where he tells us a very, very familiar prayer. But then we get to read some of the surrounding verses this morning, too. It's kind of an interesting combination this morning. So welcome up, Karen.
Matthew 6, verses 7 to 21. When you are praying, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Pray then in this way: Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we have also forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. And whenever you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show others that they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that your fasting may be seen not by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The word of the Lord.
So I want to start with a statement of truth, and it's kind of one of those statements that are like a hard pill to swallow. And it goes like this: there's always somebody who does it better than you. I call this the post-high school wake-up call, right? Because in any given high school, you could probably be the best at something. And I looked this up. Since there are 850 students in the average American high school, there's a good chance that you were the most something. And if you went to a small rural school, raise your hand if you went to like a small rural school, and you had like 15 classmates, there was a good chance you were the best at a lot of things. It might have been sports, but even if you weren't the best at basketball, you could still be the best at free throw shooting or playing defense. Or if it wasn't sports, there's all sorts of other things you could have been the best at: cars, computers, music, video games, painting, ceramics, cooking, baking, reading, math. You might be the funniest or the prettiest, or maybe you're just the sulkiest, but you're still the best at it, or the edgiest or the baddest. There is some market in the high school social hierarchy that you could have a corner on and build your whole personality around. But then something happens. Like everyone, you eventually finish high school. And as you leave off into the great wide world, you might get stuck in the glory days, or you might head out into the world, whether that's college or some job somewhere, and pretty quickly you find out there is always someone who does it better than you. That could be a hard lesson. Finding out that the thing that you thought you were uniquely talented at is actually not so unique. I spent countless, I'm talking hundreds, thousands of hours, days, weeks, months of my high school life practicing and trying so hard to be the best at playing the trumpet. I practiced at home, I practiced at school. I played in 3 ensembles in my high school. I even won the state contest for trumpet performance, which in North Dakota is not like the biggest deal, but it was still pretty good. I was the best. I was so bad at sports, being a small, slow, uncoordinated boy that I was. Trumpet felt like, when I was playing trumpet, I really mattered. When I was performing on stage, it felt so important. And then within a couple of weeks of college, I realized that everyone who continues to play trumpet in college was also the best trumpet player in their high school. And I was no longer the biggest fish in a small pond. I was a big fish in a tiny pond full of mutant giant fish. And some of those fish were more ambitious, harder working, or more talented than me. And so, I quit. I quit playing the trumpet because I was no longer the best, and I was not experiencing the kind of affirmation and accolades that I was used to. My trumpet playing never really recovered after that, because it was no longer giving my life the meaning and value that it once did. I no longer treasured it. A big part of all this competing and comparing and trying to be the best is at the core what we treasure, what we think is most valuable in our lives, what gives our life meaning and purpose. Being the best at something means that we're worthy because people notice us. We're always comparing the treasures we have to the treasures of somebody else. Like, who has more money, or a nicer car, or a bigger house? How many more likes did that person get on their Instagram post or Twitter? Whose family is more behaved at church? Whose marriage is happier? We even do it with our spirituality, comparing our spiritual lives to other people. I once was in this worship service with a whole bunch of other pastors, sort of like a pastor conference gathering. And at this worship service, I was praying with other pastors, was sort of asked to be a prayer leader. And one of the pastors came up to me, and he's sort of my age. And after I just finished praying for him and his family and his life, he said in this exasperated and jealous voice, "You even pray better than me." I was shocked. Here I was trying to join with this guy in the depth of his pain and his sorrow, and all he could think about was who is better at praying. But it's so true. I mean, how many preachers do I know who are better than me? And when I hear one of those preachers preaching, the good thing to do would be like, wow, such a great preacher. I have so much to learn. But instead, my sinful self, my jealous self comes up and says, wow, I can't believe she's better than me. And now with social media, there are just so many endless ways that we can compare and judge and criticize everything, including our faith. So we live these lives trying to prove to everyone else that we matter because we're the most interesting or the most talented or the funniest or the smartest or the most spiritual, or at least we're more of those things than somebody else. Now, to be sure, Jesus didn't know anything about social media. Sports weren't nearly the thing they are today in Jesus' time, and there were no high schools. But Jesus does know all about this. He knew about worth. He knew about value. He lived in a world with other human beings, and he saw how in this world there are winners and there are losers. He saw people who were competing in that day and age to be the most spiritual. He saw how some people could talk and talk and talk, kind of like me, and without ever really saying anything at all. He saw how people would make a spectacle of how they gave to the poor or the synagogue without ever doing something that was a real sacrifice. He saw people showing off their spirituality like a badge of honor. All these people in his midst who treasured the way that others think about them, who treasured status and fame, and he knew just how miserable their lives and our lives are when our treasure, our deepest desire, and a foundation of our meaning lies in the way that other people see us. And Jesus knows that God is just not like that at all. Especially when we try to turn our spiritual lives, our relationship with God, into comparison or competition. And there was a lot of that going on in Jesus' day and age. And he saw it in the three big faith practices of his day: in praying, in giving to the poor, and in fasting. And in the Sermon on the Mount, he comes at all three. First, he says, when you pray, don't make a big show about it. Don't call attention to yourself. Don't use a bunch of empty words because you like the sound of your voice or you're trying to be impressive. In fact, you really don't have to say much of anything at all because God already knows everything that you were going to ask for anyway. And instead, Jesus gives us a prayer that we can do instead. A simple prayer that doesn't ask for much. Daily bread, forgiveness, the power to resist evil. And then when it comes to fasting, Jesus says, don't make a big show of that either, looking dismal for everyone to see. Now, this is a tough lesson to learn, and it's one that I had to learn at some point in my life. Because back when I was younger, I really liked giving things up for Lent. It was like this challenge that I took on myself every year, and every year I wanted to outdo the thing I gave up last year, which meant I just made myself extraordinarily miserable for 6 weeks every single year. And one year that I was in college, this was like the pinnacle of me giving things up. I decided I was going to give up meat for Lent. I didn't know anything about being vegetarian, so that just meant I ate pasta for 6 weeks straight. Not great for my health. And my friend Sarah, who had been my friend from high school all the way into college, had seen me go through this process every single year, and she finally had enough. And at the beginning of that Lent, when I told her I was giving up meat for Lent, Sarah said, "Joe, stop it. I do not want to listen to you whine and complain every single day for the next 6 weeks of my life." And she was right. My Lenten practice was more about me and my misery and how other people would be impressed by my misery than it had anything to do with Jesus and my relationship with him. And Jesus' advice here is the exact same. He says, clean yourself up. Don't go through town looking like you got one foot in the grave. It's enough that your Father who sees in secret will see you. And then as for giving, he says, don't make a show of that either. Especially if it doesn't even make a dent in your wallet. Do you remember the other story in the gospel of the widow's mite? How no one noticed how much the widow gave because it looked like so little? Well, everyone else made a big show of their gifts, made it loud and proud. Jesus says, give most of it away. Don't store up your treasures on earth. Store up your treasures with God, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What I think is absolutely fascinating about these 3 bits of advice that Jesus gives us this morning is how they are all secretive. If you pray the Lord's Prayer, which pretty much everybody knows, how are people going to know the depth of your spirituality? How are they going to know your amazing theology? And if you fast in secret, how will anyone know how dedicated to God you are? How will anyone know how miserable you made yourself for the sake of your faith? And if you give to the poor or charity or the church and nobody knows about it, how will people know the sacrifices that you make for others? And Jesus' answer to every one of those questions is, who cares? These things are not about being the best or about being noticed. These things aren't even about you. It's about trusting in God. That when you fast, you trust that God will provide your next meal. That when you give and you sacrifice, you trust that God will take care of you even if you have less. That when you pray, that you pray for God's will to be done in your life. Trusting in God's plan and not your own. Jesus' advice here is truly and utterly countercultural. He says, do things for God and for your neighbor anonymously in order to deepen your trust and your relationship with God in secret. Now, I don't usually get up here and preach at you and tell you what to do and try to get you to behave a certain way, and I don't plan to start that today. However, I do want to give you an invitation this week. I want to invite you to try something this week. And here's the thing, no one is going to know you ever did it. I want you to simply try something in your life to deepen your relationship with God. And then don't tell another soul about it. Maybe try fasting of some sort. Like give up coffee or alcohol or bread for 1 week. Something small that you love. And don't complain to your spouse about it every single time you have a craving. Don't make a show of it at all. Instead, each time you have that craving, just give thanks to God for providing for you. And trusting that God will provide again. Or maybe try giving away some money. That one's kind of harder to do in secret. So this one, it doesn't count if you go to the coffee shop and then you pay for the person behind you because the coffee person saw you and the people behind you saw your car. It doesn't count. Do something totally anonymously, something no one notices, not even the IRS. Or try to pray a little different this weekend. Maybe pray the Lord's Prayer in 7 unique situations this week. Like driving to work or brushing your teeth or while your coffee brews. Just something different to really think about the words that Jesus has given us to pray on a daily basis. Whatever you do, just don't tell anybody. And I don't know what it's going to do for you. I can't predict that. It might not do anything for you. But my hope is that it would be a reminder to you of the one relationship in your life that matters above the rest. The one in secret, the one no one can see. The one between you and God. God knows you so deeply. God even knows what you need before you do. But how well do you know God in your life? God has given you more than you could ever hope for in this life. But how much do you really treasure it on a day-to-day basis? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And God will always be there for you. God will take care of you. God will provide for you no matter what. But how much do you trust it? So try something this week. It doesn't matter if you're the best. It doesn't even matter if you're very good. It will be enough for God because you are enough just as you are. Amen.